On this segment of Behind the Headlines, Jerry and I are going to be talking about Pennsylvania clean power. And on this particular segment, we're lucky enough to have one of the experts in the Commonwealth on this subject, Abby Foster. Abby, you are the Director of Communications and Advocacy for the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an important time in Pennsylvania's energy economy right now.
Well, we appreciate you coming here and spending some time with us. Before we get into Pennsylvania specifically, some of the statistics that I've dug up last week on this particular subject was the final rule for the Clean Power Plan released by the Obama administration in August of this year represents a direct attack on the coal industry. The final plan, supported by, in fact, Senator Clinton, will close 66 power plants, eliminate 125,800 jobs in the coal industry. The industry will shrink by 48%, and this will cost, if we lose 125,800 jobs, this will cost the people of the United States $9.8 billion per year in lost wages. This is a profound rule, isn't it?
Sure.
Makes a big difference in our economy and how we go about this. Jerry?
With those facts there, I know that's talking about August, that Charlie's talking about, but maybe you can tell our viewers, how does this even line up with what's happened before? How many have already been closed on this war on coal?
Sure. So this isn't the first EPA regulation that's come down on coal-fired power plants. The mercury air toxins regulation was set about in 2011, and coal-fired power plants are still in the process of complying with that rule. Multi-million-dollar investments into power plants. Nationwide, there were 400 coal-fired power plants that were shut down in 36 states. In Pennsylvania, there were several coal-fired power plants and several hundred jobs that were lost. The kicker is that in June of this last year, the mercury air toxin standard was found by the Supreme Court that the EPA did not consider the cost of compliance. They didn't do a fair analysis on actually complying with the rule and what it would cost utilities and consumers, and the rule was remanded back to the D.C. Circuit Court. This is really important to note because this new regulation will be much more costly than the mercury air toxin standard, the rule on carbon emissions, the Clean Power Plan, because it's not just using available technology to retrofit coal-fired power plants. It's actually transitioning away from current coal-fired power plants to other sources. So you've got infrastructure that you have to build. You have subsidies for renewable energy that you have to finance in order to get them into the market. It's transitioning away from coal-fired power plants before their lifespan is done.
Mm-hmm. Well, before the Clean Power Plan can take effect, it has to be, I believe, published in the Federal Register 3 times, and that has yet to happen. And Pennsylvania's been sort of leading the way, trying to get out in front of whatever's going to happen. The Department of Environmental Protection here in Pennsylvania had set up 14 listening sessions around the Commonwealth. What happened with those listening sessions? What did DEP hope to accomplish by doing this, and what has been accomplished, Abby?
Sure. So on October 23rd, it actually was published in the Federal Register, and it's good to note that EPA took so long to publish it because they're kind of running the clock on the states right now. It's a little bit of a game they're playing. Lawsuits can't be filed until it is in the Federal Register. Since its filing just a couple weeks ago, 27 states have filed suit, 24 national associations that represent 80% of the economy. You've got the National Association of Manufacturers, National Federation of Independent Businesses, as well as some labor unions and companies have filed suit. They've requested a stay, which we should have a result on sometime in January. But it's definitely an issue that is dividing the country, more so against EPA than for. And since before it was even published, DEP set about to comply, and they hosted the listening sessions statewide. There were 14 of them, and a 60-day open comment period on how Pennsylvania should comply with this rule. They were very technical questions, rate versus mass compliance, whether they should do regional trading, interstate trading, intrastate. But there was definitely a good showing around the state. Over 1,000 comments and testimony were given to DEP, and I actually have gone through all of them. And there was a good majority of people were pro clean power. That's a very easy polling statement. If you ask the general public, do you want clean power? Of course. But there is a cost to consider with complying with that. And when you ask people, do you want clean power and will you pay an extra 20 to 30% for your electric bill? They say no. So there was a good showing from the coal industry at these listening sessions and for testimony. From the IBEW represented the workers that jobs would be lost. Legislators, utilities came and asked for the 2-year extension so that costs could be considered. And you had, of course, the manufacturers who rely on low-cost electricity and reliable electricity, and the PA chamber. There was a good showing across the state asking DEP to slow down and consider the impacts.
So besides cost, which I think is very important, and that needs to get out to all of our viewers, everyone wants clean air, and we certainly want it yesterday. And I believe that the standards have been improved and that the air is cleaner than ever before. But as people see that their electricity bills keep going up and up because of this getting cleaner. At what point do you see, as people across the state could contact their legislators or contact their congressmen, since obviously you've pointed out that this is a federal and a state issue? What are the dates that would be important to consumers to know that will be impacting them? I know every month the price keeps going up because of these things in the past and what's proposed, but what key dates do you see in the future?
Well, you are correct that the air has gotten cleaner. Since the 1970s, the emissions from coal-fired power plants for the other regulated under the EPA National Ambient Air Quality Standards, those emissions have reduced 85% per electric generating unit. And during that same time, coal utilization for coal-fired power plants increased 163%. So the U.S. is doing a great job. Their coal-fired power plants are state-of-the-art. They're much better than other countries around the world. You can see in other countries they're developing coal-fired power plants, and the coal consumption globally grew 14% from 2008 to 2012, and that was faster than any other fossil fuel. In the same time, U.S. reduced their national emissions from carbon by 23%, while China and India increased by 30%, respectively. And then we found, New York Times just reported a couple weeks ago that China had actually had some errors with their statistical reporting, and it was 17% more than what they had actually reported. And 17% by China's standards, that's actually, it's a big number. It's 70% of the total coal used annually by the U.S. And so this is not small potatoes. If the president's going into these Paris negotiations and we've got countries that are not transitioning away from coal, they're building their economies on it. But the air has certainly gotten cleaner, and coal-fired power plants have evolved as technology is available. That's what setting achievable regulations is so important, and that's what's missing here with this carbon emissions standard, because commercially technology is not available for retrofitting on coal-fired power plants right now. As far as dates going for contacting your legislator, under Act 175, which was passed under Governor Corbett, the Department of Environmental Protection has to submit the state implementation plan, how they're going to comply to the General Assembly 100 days before it goes to the EPA. So that's going to be around Memorial Day this year, if DEP is going to be submitting a plan by 2016, which they do not have to. There is an available 2-year extension that they could take advantage from. So they could contact their legislator when the state implementation plan goes to the General Assembly. I mean, it's always good to keep your legislator informed on these issues. We just had a hearing this past Tuesday on the 17th with the Coal Caucus, and there were about 30 legislators that came. It was the impacts on the coal industry and associated industries. We had a timber industry, a couple of the men and women from the industry that were working in jobs, and it's important to note that the trickle-down effect is real in Pennsylvania. So it's not just a regulation on coal or coal-fired power plants. This is on railroads. At one of the listening sessions, R.J. Corman Railroad testified that they had seen a drop 43% year-to-date on their revenue because about 68% of Pennsylvania coal is shipped around on railroads. It's a big impact industry, and it's deeply embedded in Pennsylvania's economy.
On Tuesday, November the 17th, in the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Senate took some action on this issue. What did they do, Abby? Could you tell our viewers what happened there?
So under the Congressional Review Act, they had 2 resolutions, and one would be able to repeal the Clean Power Plan. Unfortunately, the president has already issued a statement saying that he will veto, but it is very telling to show that he is going into these climate negotiations with other countries, and he doesn't have his Congress behind him on this. They understand the impacts on both ratepayers, on the economy, and on the jobs in their districts.
That's not unusual, since the president said he was going to close them all down,
Right.
and he had this, war on coal. So I guess our viewers sort of know how this is stacking up, and unfortunately, you're giving us the bad news that this is what's costing us, and what it is going forward. What would you estimate the cost, to the people, that use electricity, which is everybody in our
Right,
Commonwealth?
right. And
what do you think the cost would be?
It's one of the very attractive things about Pennsylvania for businesses and for manufacturers. We do have a really great, diverse electric portfolio in Pennsylvania, and that is wonderful because when there is a big spike in demand, that we've got natural gas, coal, and nuclear. Those are all baseload suppliers of electricity that ensure that there is not any brownouts. There are not any spikes that they can foresee and they can predict the market, and that's what makes Pennsylvania attractive for business. The Energy Ventures Analysis has done a study on the cost of compliance, and in Pennsylvania, they estimated that 13% to 26%. So 13% before the 2022 deadline for the first interim check-in compliance period, and then by 2030, which is when you're supposed to have your emissions completely reduced. For Pennsylvania, it's 34.9%. It would go up to 26%, and those are wholesale electric costs. It's important to note for wholesale electric costs that that's not just what you're going to get on your electric bill, because you have transmission costs that are factored in for every electric bill that you get. That's the cost of infrastructure, building pipelines, the money that's used for putting renewables into the market, and so it's going to have certainly a large impact on Pennsylvania.
Just as a follow-up, then, that doesn't make sense then as to why Pennsylvania departments would be going ahead trying to be the leader on this when we've been behind on so many other really good issues where we're usually 47, 48, 49, 50. But I think what I read was that Pennsylvania's looking to be number one. Is that true?
Right. It is. The Department of Environmental Protection has said that they would like to submit the plan by 2016. The problem is that once the plan is submitted, even if litigation wins out, even if its parts are overturned by a new president, it is legally binding. So Pennsylvania will have to be upheld to the 2022 deadline and the 2030 deadline, while other states waited and weighed the cost of compliance.
Well, the cost of compliance, and then we have to wrap this up. If the Clean Power Plan is introduced in Pennsylvania, some of the figures that we've seen, do you concur with these or not, that wholesale electric rates will increase by 13% by 2022 and 26% by 2030?
Correct.
That's a major increase in the cost of doing business, isn't it, in Pennsylvania?
Yes, absolutely.
And, and that'll, of course, that will trickle down to the individual consumers. Okay, well, Abby, we want to thank you so much for spending some time with Jerry and me this morning. And we want to invite you back to spend time with us again next week. We'll see you next week on Behind the Headlines. Tune in.